When people talk about financial milestones, they usually say the same things: $100,000, $500,000, $1 million, $10 million. If they have spent too much time around people who talk loudly and think in thumbnails, I understand why those numbers attract attention. They are round, they sound large, they photograph well in the imagination. They allow a person to tell a very dramatic story about what money is supposed to feel like. But if you ask me what number truly changes a person's financial life in the deepest way, I do not start with 100,000. I start much earlier. I start with the first 10,000. That surprises people because they think $10,000 is too small to matter. They are wrong. $10,000 is the first serious line. It is the first point where money begins changing, not only what you can buy, but how you think. It is the point where you stop relating to money only as a monthly emergency and begin relating to it as stored power. It is where the psychology changes. It is where the discipline becomes visible. It is where the future stops feeling entirely theoretical. Most people misunderstand this because they judge money only by its ability to impress. I judge money by its ability to reduce fear. 100,000 is a very important number in investing because the compounding becomes more noticeable. They're fine, $1 million matters too. Of course it does. But long before those thresholds become relevant, there is another transformation that determines whether a person is ever likely to reach them in the first place. That transformation happens when you prove to yourself that you can hold on to 5 digits, not borrow it, not receive it as a tax refund and watch it disappear, not inherit it, not get it in one lucky burst and then spend it like a frightened man who has never believed money could stay. Build it, protect it, hold it, see it sitting there, and know that you, with your ordinary life and your ordinary obligations, created that cushion and did not let life devour it. That changes a person, and I care about what changes a person more than what flatters a spreadsheet. When I was young, I learned that money is not only arithmetic, it is emotional architecture. A man who has no buffer thinks differently from a man who has one. The first man walks through the day with invisible pressure in his chest. A strange noise in the car feels larger. A delayed paycheck feels larger. A rude boss feels larger. The price of groceries feels personal. A dentist appointment becomes something to postpone. A missed shift becomes a story that keeps him awake at 2 a.m. The second man may not feel rich, but he breathes differently. That difference matters. This is why the first 10,000 is so important. Not because it buys luxury, because it buys breathing room. And breathing room is where better judgment begins. Now, I want to tell the truth about how hard that first 10,000 can be. There is a habit in financial culture of speaking as though ordinary saving were easy if only people were more disciplined. Sometimes that is true. Many people do spend foolishly and could improve their position by being more deliberate. I believe that firmly. But I also believe in respecting arithmetic. The average salary in America is not some fairy tale number. After taxes and the ordinary cost of life, most households are not dealing with oceans of excess cash. If a person earns somewhere in the neighborhood of the national average and saves 20% of what he brings home, he is already doing far better than most people around him. That matters because many people who sit stuck in the 4-figure range are not only fighting bad habits, they are fighting rent, food, fuel, insurance, medical co-pays, family obligations, poor financial education, and a culture engineered to separate them from money before it can ever start working on their behalf. When I see someone cross from 4 figures to 5, I do not just see a larger bank balance. I see evidence. Evidence that the person has done some combination of the following things. He reduced unnecessary consumption. He delayed gratification. He learned to say no. He survived months when it would have been easier to empty the account. He stopped treating money as something that instantly turns into lifestyle. He began, however imperfectly, to build habits compatible with wealth. That is why I say the first 10,000 is proof. It is proof that saving is not just a phrase for you. It is a behavior. And behaviors matter because identity grows from repeated behavior, not from intention. A person who says he wants to get ahead but never saves remains a hopeful consumer. A person who reaches 10,000 has become something else. He has become a saver, in fact, not merely an aspiration. That identity shift is incredibly valuable. People underrate the importance of proving something to themselves. Once you have done one hard thing, your mind stops treating it as mythical. That is why the first 10,000 creates momentum. Before 10,000, saving can feel like pretending. After 10,000, it feels like a system that actually works. That matters enormously when the next milestone comes into view. Because once a person has crossed 5 digits, he no longer treats 25,000 as science fiction. He no longer treats 50,000 as the exclusive property of people with richer parents or luckier lives. The numbers are still large, they simply stop feeling supernatural. That is how wealth begins psychologically. Not when the account becomes huge, when the impossible becomes normal. The second reason the first 10,000 matters so much is compounding. Now, I know compounding has become one of those words people repeat so often that it starts sounding decorative. Einstein said this, "The eighth wonder of the world, fine." People quote the line and then continue living as though compounding were optional. I am not interested in the quote, I am interested in the machine. Compounding is what happens when money stops being only stored labor and begins becoming productive capital. That transition is the whole game. And 10,000 is the first point where many ordinary people can actually feel the edge of that machine in a meaningful way. Not because 10,000 instantly makes them rich. It does not. Because 10,000 is large enough that the returns start becoming more than symbolic. The source material gives a simple example. Suppose you save $1,000 a year and earn 7%. That is a conservative rate compared with long-run equity market averages. In that example, it takes roughly 7.5 years to reach the first 10,000. But the next 10,000 does not require another 7.5 years because the initial balance has started doing some of the work. That is the key lesson. The first phase is powered mostly by you. Later phases are powered by you and the money together. This is exactly what people miss when they get discouraged early. In the beginning, savings feels unfair because the account moves only when you move it. You save, the number rises, you stop. The number barely twitches. That is emotionally disappointing. It makes people think the process is weak. The process is simply early. There is an enormous difference. Compounding is not exciting at first because the base is too small. That does not mean it is not working. It means you have not yet fed it enough. And I think that is one of the cruelest parts of personal finance. The phase where discipline is most needed is also the phase where the visible reward is weakest. That is why so many people quit just before the process begins behaving in a way that would finally have convinced them. This is also why I have always liked getting to 10,000 as quickly as reasonably possible, not recklessly, not through gambling, not through trying to turn 10,000 into existence overnight with some idiotic speculation. I mean through disciplined saving, improved earnings if possible, side income if sensible, and consistent contribution. If you can reach 10,000 in 1 to 2 years instead of 7 or 8, you have shortened the emotionally dead period of the whole compounding journey. That is not a small advantage. It means your capital begins helping you sooner, your confidence increases sooner, and the identity shift arrives sooner. The first 10,000 is not just a sum of money, it is the ignition point. The third reason 10,000 changes a person is confidence. Now here I want to be careful, because I do not mean arrogance. Arrogance is cheap and common. I mean grounded confidence, the kind that comes from private evidence. Social media has made financial perception almost unusable. If you listened only to the modern internet, you would think every 26-year-old has 3 rental properties, a 7-figure net worth, a software company on the side, and a channel explaining abundance to strangers while filmed in a rented luxury car. That is not reality. That is theater with ring lights. Reality is much harsher and much more ordinary. A huge percentage of Americans would struggle to cover a $1,000 emergency. Nearly half say they are living paycheck to paycheck. That context matters. It means 10,000 is not a toy number. It is a serious break from the norm. That is why 10,000 brings confidence, not performative confidence, quiet confidence, the kind that says, I can handle things, I can save, I can protect money. I am not doomed to remain one bad week away from chaos. That inner shift matters more than most people understand because beliefs change behavior. A man who believes he can never get ahead behaves differently from a man who has evidence that he can. The first man often spends to soothe. He hesitates to invest. He thinks in shortages. He says no to long-term opportunities because he does not trust his own ability to recover. The second man If he is careful, begins asking a different set of questions, not can I survive, but what can I build? That is a better question. And often it begins with the first 5-digit balance. The fourth reason 10,000 is powerful is that it functions as real insurance. I do not mean the theatrical kind. I mean the most practical kind in life, the kind that saves you from turning ordinary bad luck into financial damage that lasts for years. Most emergency expenses are not glamorous disasters. They are not planes crashing into your budget all at once. They are much more common, and therefore in some ways more dangerous. A transmission fails. A dental procedure cannot be delayed. A child needs something right now. A pet gets sick. A flight must be booked unexpectedly. A heater dies in winter. A landlord wants a deposit. A job ends awkwardly. These are the things that make people use credit cards, borrow against themselves, skip investing, or accept terrible terms from the world because they have no cash to say no with. Most emergencies are not giant in absolute terms. What makes them destructive is the absence of a buffer. A $2,300 surprise is annoying to the man with $10,000 in reserve. It is destabilizing to the man with $700 in his account. That is why 10,000 is so significant. It covers the overwhelming majority of life as ordinary financial shocks. Not every possible catastrophe. No, but enough of them that the emotional burden of daily life begins to change. That is what an emergency fund is really for. It is not there to impress anyone. It is there so that one problem does not breed 5 more. A man without reserves gets a car repair and suddenly misses a credit card payment, delays an investment contribution, pays interest, loses sleep, argues with his spouse, and makes weaker decisions at work because he is preoccupied. The bill was one event. The damage was much larger. A man with reserves pays the bill, feels irritated, and moves on. That is not only a financial difference, it is a cognitive difference. The reserve protects judgment. That is one reason I have always respected liquidity. Not because cash is the highest return asset over long periods. It certainly is not. But because liquidity prevents forced stupidity. The fifth reason 10,000 changes your life is that it improves your decision-making position. This is more subtle than the emergency fund point, but it may be even more important. When people are under financial pressure, they choose the cheapest visible option too often, even when the cheapest option is not the best value. This is not always their fault. Pressure narrows the mind. It forces the short-term question to dominate. What is the cheapest thing I can do right now? That question can keep a person alive in hard stretches. It is not a wonderful question for building a life. Once you have 10,000, the question can begin changing. Not what is cheapest, but what is best value. That sounds like a small linguistic shift. It is not. It changes the whole relationship between money and choice. A man with no cushion buys shoes that disintegrate because he cannot afford the better pair, even though the better pair would be cheaper over the full life of the product. He buys the worst food because the checkout total matters more urgently than long-term energy, health, and performance. He says yes to the wrong job because the wrong job starts Monday and the right job search requires breathing room. He does not have. He does not negotiate. He accepts. That is what scarce cash does. $10,000 does not make a person wealthy, but it can move him out of desperation territory. It gives him room to choose value over immediate cheapness in at least some areas of life that matters. A good pair of shoes that last years, a healthier grocery basket that supports better energy, a course or tool that increases earning power, a short stretch of time between jobs so a better decision can be made. All of these things are easier when you are not living at the edge of the cliff. That is why I say money becomes a tool at 10,000 instead of only a limiter. This is one of the first points where the relationship shifts from money as survival fuel to money as strategic instrument. That is not a small difference. It is adulthood in a deeper sense. The sixth reason 10,000 matters is that it unlocks your first real investment options. Before 10,000, many people technically can invest, but the practical meaning is different. If you have $2,000 in the bank and unstable monthly obligations, your investable surplus is likely thin. A few $100s in the market is still worth doing. I never mock starting small. Starting small is one of the most honorable things a person can do. But we should also be honest that at very low levels, the effect of investing feels abstract because the stakes are not yet meaningful enough to teach the lessons powerfully. Once the financial base reaches 10,000, the menu changes. You can make contributions to a Roth IRA that actually feel like something. You can buy real positions in broad market funds rather than symbolic pieces. You can fund a side project that has a legitimate chance of producing income. You can begin learning what it feels like when your money is not only sitting there but working, however modestly, in a way you can observe. This matters because investing is partly educational. A person who has never watched his own money grow in productive assets often treats investing as mythology. He hears about it, he admires it from a distance. He says one day, then 10,000 arrives, and he can finally begin building a real bridge between savings and ownership. That bridge is the whole point. Savings alone is not the finish line. Savings is the launch pad without the launch pad. Investing remains fragile because every unexpected expense can force the whole process to reverse. With the launch pad, investing can become durable. Now let me say something important here. 10,000 should not make a person reckless. Some people finally hit the mark and immediately start behaving as though they are now qualified to speculate. That is childish. The first 10,000 should make you calmer, not louder. It should make you more careful about ownership, not more theatrical about risk, broad low-cost index funds, retirement contributions, modest side, busyness experiments, perhaps a high-yield savings reserve depending on your structure. These are sensible uses. Turning the first real buffer into a casino chip because the internet said conviction is how fortunes are made is one of the fastest ways to go backwards psychologically. Once you lose your first serious savings through vanity, the emotional damage can be worse than the financial damage. I prefer durable beginnings. The seventh reason 10,000 changes your life is that it reduces financial anxiety enough to let your mind work correctly. Again, this may be the most important one of all. A person who lives too close to empty lives with a constant background noise in his mind. Most people do not even realize how loud it is because they have grown used to it. Every purchase is evaluated through fear. Every delay carries threat. Every irregular expense feels accusatory. Money is not one problem among others. It becomes the lens through which every problem is felt. That is expensive. Not only emotionally, it is expensive in decision quality. People under financial pressure become more reactive, more desperate, more likely to choose from urgency rather than value. This is not moral weakness. It is what scarcity does. At 10,000, the background noise often starts to fade, not disappear completely. I am not romanticizing it, but fade that matters, because once the background noise falls, a person can think about other things again. He can plan. He can compare opportunities without panic. He can choose long-term goals. He can begin experiencing life with a little space between himself and the next bill. A person who has proved he can save, who has an emergency cushion, and who sees the possibility of further accumulation, does begin to think differently. He starts seeing money as a tool to grow rather than only a thing that disappears. He becomes more willing to invest, to delay gratification, and to think beyond the next immediate constraint, because he now has evidence that the future is not closed to him. That is one of the hidden miracles of the first 10,000. It does not just increase your net worth, it changes your emotional operating system. And once that system changes, later financial progress often accelerates because your behavior improves with it. This is the virtuous cycle. You save, the account rises, the cushion reduces fear, reduced fear improves judgment, better judgment produces better decisions produce stronger finances. Stronger finances produce more confidence. Confidence supports discipline. Discipline creates more saving. That loop is very powerful. Most people think money is linear, get more money, feel better. It is not. Money can be cyclical in a very constructive way if the early threshold is crossed and the person respects what the threshold means. Now let me be plain about something else. 10,000 is not magic. It is a threshold, a doorway, a shift, not a destination. Some people misunderstand financial milestones because they expect each one to change everything permanently. That is not how it works. Milestones matter because they alter what becomes possible. Next, $10,000 does not remove all risk. It does not excuse sloppy decisions. It does not mean you are now rich or wise or immune to error. It means the game changes. It means you are no longer dealing only with survival arithmetic. You are now dealing with strategic arithmetic that is a better game. But you still have to play it well. So if I were speaking to a younger person trying to reach this threshold, or to an older person who still has not reached it and feels ashamed, I would say this: do not be ashamed. Be exact. Stop calling the number too small to matter. Stop dismissing it because the culture only talks in 6 and 7 figures. The first 10,000 is a serious achievement precisely because it is hard enough to require real change and small enough to be achievable in a reasonable period. If you become ruthless about your habits, your earning power, and your priorities, it is the first line where discipline becomes visible. And if you are already there, do not waste the line, protect it, use it. Let it change how you think. Do not celebrate it to death. Do not treat it like extra spending room. Do not turn it into a down payment on new fixed costs just because your account now looks a little healthier. Use it as a wedge that opens the rest of your financial life. That is what it is for. If you ask me where true financial transformation begins for ordinary people, I would not point to $1 million. Too many lives are already shaped long before that. I would point to the first 10,000 because that is where habits become identity, where emergencies stop being catastrophic, where compounding becomes meaningful, where options expand, and where a person first begins to feel, perhaps quietly, that money is no longer entirely something that happens to him. That is the first real freedom. And first freedoms matter, because once a person has felt one, he becomes much less willing to return to the old captivity.